Hey, can you hear me all right?
Everybody, my name is Jelani, and welcome to the 24th episode of the DeSci Rising series put on by DeSci World, where our goal here is always to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci World and wider DeSci community. Now, the idea behind all this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community leveraging these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we are looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industry. Now, in today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Harry Jayaraman, who I think is I can consider a friend at this point. He is the founder of HealthXChange, which is a platform dedicated to driving innovation in precision medical research by incentivizing the donation of healthcare data. And so, without further ado, Harry, thank you for taking the time today to help us learn more about not only yourself, but also the work being done at HealthXChange.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here and happy to sort of share what we're working on. We think it's something that sort of anyone can get involved in and really make a dent on healthcare and really how we create medicines in the 21st century. So yeah, definitely really excited to hop into it.
I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing how the wider community can definitely get involved. But as with any good story, it's always nice to have the origin story. And hopefully everybody here is not a villain, so it's not a villain origin story. And so Harry, I'd love to hear like your introduction, your foray. How did you go from the where you were at in Web 2 and kind of transition into Web 3?
Got it. So I think Jelani covered a good chunk of it, but my name's Hari. I'm the founder of Health Exchange. Prior to founding Health Exchange, I still work as a consultant for pharmaceutical companies. So primarily today, I help pharma companies develop software products and get them out into the world, essentially. Now, why would a pharma company do that? You can imagine, let's say there's a pharma company that makes heart disease drugs. It's in their best interest that everyone with heart disease gets caught early, diagnosed, because the more people that get diagnosed, the more people get on drugs. And the more people that get on drugs, the more people get on that particular pharma company's drugs. So nowadays, a lot of pharma companies are starting to create tools to accurately diagnose patients. Because as you can imagine, there's a shortage of doctors in the United States. A lot of patients go underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, or if they get diagnosed, it's usually like a couple of years late. Doctors don't spend that much time with patients. I think on average in the United States, they spend like 15 to 20 minutes per year with a single patient. But to really give good care, it takes maybe hours, right? You probably need to spend like 2.5 hours with a patient per year um, to really assess them for everything that could potentially be going wrong with their bodies. And so these pharma companies have created algorithms, um, and they put them out, but there hasn't been a lot of uptake, right? When you go to the doctor, you don't get a lot of AI that happens, and so because of that, there's a lot of opportunity to expand the way software is delivered today. And so, like, I was just thinking about this idea because, for our clients, like, they want to put out software that's good for people, good for patients, but they're running into technical roadblocks. And during that time, I sort of got lost, I think around like 2019, into the crypto space. I heard about Ethereum and Bitcoin back in, I think I heard about Bitcoin in like 2012, and Ethereum around 2017. And to this day, and I say this and get some flack for it in certain communities, but I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin because you can't do anything with it, right? It's a non-productive asset, as they say. And so, yeah, it's digital gold. I understand the cultural relevance. A lot of people made a lot of money, and that's like great for them. But the reason I won't like put money into Bitcoin is the same reason I won't put money into art or gold, right? You can't do anything with it. It just sort of sits there. It looks pretty. And yeah, there's scarcity and value can go up, but it doesn't do anything. Now, I assume that Ethereum was the same thing, but in 2019, I read the Ethereum white paper and I was blown away. Like it went away from, digital gold and a store of value and things like that and turned into something you could actually use to uh, create communities, create essentially like whole new worlds based on uh, sort of transparent rules that'll allow, sort of trustless coordination uh, across sort of different entities. So got really interested in that. Started looking into projects like BAT, Basic Attention Token, projects like Helium. These are projects that have real use cases, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit as well. But that's sort of how I got into the crypto space, and how I got here today. And so what Health Exchange is, it sort of marries the two ideas that we've been talking about. Essentially, it lets someone, or the idea is, someone can request their health records in the United States, and hospitals are obligated to give them those records in a certain way. And because of that, when there's like a timely mechanism and retrieval rate, and the data is also standardized to certain formats that the government requires hospitals to keep it in. And so our whole like model is anyone can request their health data with this new product that we'll be building. We'll probably launch this in the next 4 to 5 months. But anyone in the United States can request their healthcare data using our platform, and then they can donate it to us anonymously. We then use that information to essentially do all sorts of activity with pharma. And we can get into the specifics of that. A lot of that is research and development for new types of drugs. And a lot of that is also deployment of this software on our platform, right? Because the way this software works, it reads data and then it tells the patient how likely or how at risk that patient is to develop a certain disease. So our hope is, people join our platform, donate the data, and we can give them risk scores telling them, potentially if they have any medical issues that they need to go discuss with their doctor. And at the same time, we can make money off this data while preserving anonymity, and then split some of the profits with the patients who donated to us. So that's where the crypto angle comes in. Essentially, we pay our users for donating their data with our own cryptocurrency. And then once we generate value, we essentially will have a buyback program for the tokens. They'll likely become a security, so we plan to go through a regulatory path laid out by the SEC. We actually plan to become a security. Other companies have done it, and have done it successfully. So we think there's a pathway there going forward. But essentially, that's the gist of Health Exchange. It's essentially allowing you to anonymously stake your healthcare data and push medicine and healthcare forward. You also get a little bit of value of it as a person conscious of their health in the form of novel diagnostics, and you also get some cash. So I know I just sort of went through quite a bit there, but Jelani, if you have anything you want to dive into, we can get into it.
No, for sure. I would like, so I like the breakdown of Health Exchange, data marketplace for people to leverage, at least for themselves, to leverage their current existing medical data that is currently siloed, more or less siloed, or I guess to a certain extent locked up in hospitals and other data aggregation platforms, health data aggregation platforms, and leverage it themselves. So have that custody over their medical data and then extract value of it. And is part of the focus here because traditionally it is the hospitals themselves that are leveraging said data, or does that not happen? Is it just kind of sitting there and pharma can't get their hands on it?
Yeah, so pharma definitely does get their hands on it. And I always give
Right.
the biggest example, which is United Healthcare. United Healthcare Group is probably the largest healthcare organization in America. They're an insurance group, but they actually own uh, a hospital system. It's called Optum Network. What Optum has done in the last 5 years is essentially uh, go to independent physician practices and buy them up. And at this point, they've bought up like a lot. And when I say a lot, uh, it's estimated that there's 100 million Americans use an Optum affiliated clinic, right? So that's 1 in 3 Americans use Optum. Now, Optum has data on their patients, and what they do is when you go into one of these clinics, and really when you go into any hospital, when you sign that HIPAA waiver, um, and HIPAA is a US based privacy protection law specifically for healthcare data. But when you sign that HIPAA waiver, you actually sign away your rights to some of your rights to the hospital and allows the hospital to anonymously sort of or to scrub your data to make sure your name and your address isn't there. But they then what they do is they actually do something slightly cryptographic, which is they tokenize it and then they sell that sort of tokenized anonymous data set to a third party intermediary. Um, and then there's buyers on the other end, usually pharmaceutical companies, and in certain cases like market research companies that buy those data sets. And so, I mean, this is already like a couple $100 million market. You also see private sort of data set deals go through in the market for literally billions of dollars. There are like electronic medical records that get bought just because the pharma company wants access to the data in those records. And those deals can be anywhere between like $2 to $6 billion. So this is a huge market, right? Like this is not something that like it is esoteric and small. This happens on a daily basis, like to the point where the Optum example is like I think probably the best example because 100 million Americans is 1 in 3 Americans, right? Uh, there's 100 million Americans on a data set that Optum owns and licenses out to pharmaceutical companies. In fact, right now, all you have to Google is Optum clinical EHR data set, and you'll go to a page where they're essentially trying to sell access to that data set to pharmaceutical companies and research companies. And so I, when I speak about this, it first sounds like this niche, novel idea. But then you put it into context. 1 in 3 Americans have their healthcare data sold already today without their knowledge. Most of them. I wouldn't think most people on the street know that 1 in 3 Americans' data gets sold, right? It's like almost like a silly thing to say because of HIPAA and privacy protections and all that. But it is what happens, right? And we think that patients need to know about that and have an avenue to really generate that value for themselves and capture a part of that.
Yeah, that's insane. That's actually that's absolutely crazy if you think about it, right? 1 in 3 Americans are having their data sold, and they've essentially, unbeknownst to them and not having read through all the terms and services, and sometimes these terms and services are somewhat obfuscated and have a coercive angle to them because it's like you can't do it unless you sign these. I always love this whenever you do something with like an app or on the Apple Store. If you want to download this process, then you have to sign these terms of service, right? And so you kind of have to weigh it. And when it comes to medical jargon and your medical data, most people are not scientifically literate or medically literate enough to understand what is happening with their data. And so it's really the statistics that you just brought up is kind of mind blowing, right? 1 in 3. And that's $1 billion marketplace that people are capitalizing off of your medical data that you're just kind of waving away. If you think about it, and I'm sure you have because you're already generating, you've created HealthXChange. But if you think about it, think of how much capital, or I guess revenue or monetary incentives could offset a person's living arrangements or a person's living costs by just having custodial access or at least administrative rights or even just a royalty kickback on part of those $1 billion worth of exchange data. It's insane.
Yeah. I mean that's why we want to like structure everything that we're doing, uh, like essentially align everything that we're doing with the patient, right? We think we can create, or at least our vision is that we can create a very successful, profitable company. Um, and very successful, profitable companies have dividends, right? Like that's a pretty standard, standard financial. I don't know what you call it, but it's just standard across the industry, right? Uh, most companies or more successful companies that want to draw in investors have some sort of dividend, they have stock buyback programs, et cetera. And so I don't think it's crazy to commit a portion of future revenue streams or future profits uh, to to your users, right? Especially in our case, where the platform itself is, I mean, by definition, built by the users, right? The users have to participate. The patients have to participate in creating this data set in order for there to be a company, right? So yeah, we think it's very doable. The economics are there. To your point, $1 billion deals are going through $1 million deals for some of the smaller data access deals for more niche agreements. Um, and I also want to sort of this is all on the economic side, right? Like it's patients are currently sort of getting uh, taken advantage of. And Jelani, I just DM'd you the link to Optum's EHR dataset. I'm not sure if we can pin that tweet by any chance, or pin that link. I can DM it to
I
yeah.
will I will DM it to the DeSci World handle and I'll put it.
Yeah, we'll do it. Just did it. But yeah,
Sure.
I think there definitely are some issues, um, with patients getting taken advantage of in terms of their rights to their data, and we do want to solve that. But the flip side of this is we can actually do a lot of good from the scientific and sort of drug discovery angle, because when you think about how drugs are created today. Um, it's really done in sort of semi-random fashion. Essentially, the way drugs are created today is, first you probably have some sort of simulation software where you're simulating what a drug does to a protein conjugate or a particular target that you're looking at. And then once you run it through an online sort of simulator, then you run it through some online tox screens, and you run that drug uh, through all these computer-based simulations, such that at the end of it, you have a few leading assets that you think could make a dent in the disease that you're looking into. From there, you trial them on mice, you trial them on rats, you trial them on larger and larger mammals. You go to ape and monkey trials, and then finally you get to phase one. Um, and from phase one to phase three, I believe the failure rate or the success rate going all the way from phase one to phase three and into market is less than 7%. It's a bit less than that. So start to finish, a lot of money goes into drug development, and it's all done in this like semi-random fashion. You just synthesize molecules and then go from there. Um, and so this is probably going to change in the next 5 to 7 years, where we go away from these like random approaches to drugs and drug development, and we go to more targeted approaches where, rather than just start randomly and look at all the research everyone's doing in America and try to figure out what's causing a disease and going that route, what's going to happen is, there's going to be patients, right? For example, let's take brain cancer, right? Glioblastoma, for example, is a particularly deadly form of brain cancer. Um, and so what you would do is you would go to 10,000 patients with this brain cancer, and you would say, hey, um, you know, join us, join HealthXChange, and we'll pay you. If you pass away, you can pass it on to your children, the assets we give you. But essentially, give us your data. We'll start making deals with pharma companies that want to look at all the information you provide us, because a lot of these patients have their genome sequenced. They have a lot of rich data about their health. And so we compare that data set to a data set of healthy people, right? So people with no brain cancer, no history of any cancer, healthy lives. We look at that data set versus the data set generated by these brain cancer patients, try to pull out some sort of profile, like a genetic profile or some sort of mutational profile, to figure out what exactly is going on in these patients with brain cancer. And then essentially build a very targeted drug. And so this saves a lot of time on R&D. So getting that first asset becomes a lot quicker. Going from phase one to phase three isn't a crapshoot anymore. It actually, that rate probably increases as well, because you're no longer relying on sort of pseudo random selection. You've actually designed this drug to work in a certain way, and you've understood the human biology. And so, that's the hope, and that's the idea of precision medicine, right? You go away from these random sort of medicine development pathways into something that's hyper targeted. And the best example I like to give people as to like why this is important is the example of chemotherapy, right, in cancers. Chemotherapy, for those who don't know, we actually had a thread on this. Chemotherapy is derived from mustard gas, which is like a chemical agent used in World War One. The German troops used it against the French. It was I mean, now it's outlawed, right? It's a war crime to do something like that. But that agent, I believe it's called mustine or mustidine, was used by Yale to create the first chemotherapeutic agents. And what a chemotherapeutic agent is, it's cellular poison, right? So what it does, it finds a way to get into your body and it just starts killing all cells. So the way that works with cancers is cancers have a tendency to recruit nutrients better than other tissues. And so cancers recruit chemo, and so all the chemo builds up in the areas of your body that have cancer. And so that's the idea. Like it'll kill the cancer by killing those cells that are mutated, the cancerous cells. However, it's still poison. Just because it goes to the cancer doesn't mean doesn't go to everywhere else. It's in your bloodstream, and so that's where how you get the nasty side effects of chemo. People start throwing up. They start losing hair. That's their skin. That's their skin cells and hair follicles actually dying, right? Because you put poison into your body to kill the cancer. And now take that to what we're talking about, um, and sort of compare and contrast that. The way chemo works is you basically pump yourself full of poison and you hope the cancer dies before you die. That's literally it. That's a very simplistic version, but that is what's happening. Now, take an approach where rather than that, what you've done is you've figured out what is being mutated in the cancer cells, and you have a targeted intervention that just goes to that cancer, undoes that mutation, and lets your body clear out the cancer, right? Or let's essentially does a targeted intervention to get the cancer small enough so that you can surgically remove it. Something like that will have better survival rates than chemo. That is the way things are going to go in the future. But to develop those things, you need data, right? You can't just summon those new molecules and new CRISPR molecules and whatever therapeutic you want to give. Like that doesn't come from nowhere. We need to do research to understand that, and the only way we're going to get that is by getting real world data from patients. Right now, the infrastructure isn't there, but the average person can help out, make some money, really push medicine forward. And these drugs are going to be valuable. They work better, much better than the drugs today. And so yeah, it sort of we're trying to create a platform where every side wins, right? Pharmaceutical companies win because they get to make the next best drug and make their money. The patient wins because one, they do get their cut, they get paid. They can view all their healthcare data in one place, which is not always a trivial thing, and they can get some, as we discussed earlier, they can get diagnosed with potential risk scores, get a sense of how likely they are to develop a certain condition in the next 2 to 5 years. So we really think this is something that could help everyone out while fairly compensating patients. And that's our mission, right? Like we don't want the progress that's happening today to stop. And this idea I'm talking about, this precision medicine and these targeted therapy approaches, like pharma companies know this. That's why they're going around buying data sets, right? That's why they're spending billions of dollars. It's not like they don't think it's not going to work, right? There's stuff that Roche puts out, for example, specifically talking about a clinico-genomic data set that they're building internally. What that means is it's a data set of people's genomes and their health records. And that's what we want people to donate to us today in return for actual compensation. Roche has it through other means, right? They bought a sequencing company and they bought a electronic medical record company. That's how they built theirs, right? But they're not going to share their profits with those people. Most likely, that's not going to be the case.
No, for sure it's not. And it's unfortunate in a way, but I think it's okay because it gives room for people like yourselves, people who are spinning up other forms of biomedical data marketplaces to help facilitate this. It gives you guys room to grow and it gives you that competitive edge because it's almost a compounding effect, right? The more people who seek financial gain in terms of leveraging their medical assets, what it exposes them to is more medical knowledge and medical literacy that then provides them with a better basis to making better choices and more better medical choices and more scientific informed perspectives, which ultimately boosts scientific literacy. And I think that's a major issue that exists in society. I'm somewhat biased as a neuroimmunologist, but I think the level of scientific literacy is very low. And it is a product, it leads to a lot of misinformation and lack of understanding and policies that may not necessarily have arisen should these people or should the vast majority of individuals understand what it actually means to have certain medical procedures done to you or certain quality of life scenarios, exercise, proper eating, all these kind of things. I think it has a compounding effect on society as a whole. And it's nice to be able to sit here with participants that are helping change these small things, individually small things, but have long-term compounding. So that's great. And I love that we've spent a lot of time on the like the fundamental philosophical and even the business perspective. In terms of to bring it back a little bit more to Health Exchange itself, how do is there a means that you guys are going to put in place to help individuals get a hold of their medical data? I don't know how. So you mentioned that, as an individual, in the United States at least, I can go to the hospital wherever my medical data is stored and request that. Is that actually an easy process, or is there some difficulties there? And are you guys going to help with that
It's extremely
process?
difficult, right? That
Oh,
that's the short version. But yes, the first product we're going to put out is going to be a way to easily get your healthcare data. And so think of it like I'm not sure if people here have heard of Plaid, for example. It helps connect bank accounts to apps. But there's similar sort of I guess you can call them primitives like that, right? But primitives in the digital health space that's sort of going on right now. There's some laws passed by the United States to make it easier to retrieve records. And this was actually a huge problem like 5 years ago. Like if 5 to 7 years ago, and that's not that long ago, right? That's 2017, 2016, 2017. It was exceptionally hard for a patient to get all their data in one place. It's a bit easier today, but just as recently as like 2017, 2018, if you're diagnosed with a complex condition, you have to call hospital, and sometimes they fax it over to you. They fax over your data because everything's still in like paper format. Um, and that's changing. That's changing very rapidly. There are now like digital standards that hospitals have to comply to. Data has to be in a certain format. And so our first product sort of taps into a large sort of network. This is also some of this is based on like uh, sort of government funded databases. Some of these companies that we work with are nonprofits just trying to get patients their own data. But essentially, we tap into these companies, and for our users, what's going to look like. And again, this we don't plan to launch this for the next 4 to 5 months at the least. There could be delays based on essentially how the U.S. Enforces these data interoperability laws. But essentially, the way our product works is someone logs in. It's a few identifying information to sort of prove who you are, kind of like a KYC. But then based on that information, we can pull a U.S. citizen's health records from all over the United States. And so we can get this total view of every time you've ever been to the doctor and every time you've been prescribed something. And that all sits in one place for the patient to view. And that in and of itself, that's going to be just that. We're not even going to have the donation system. We will just want to put that out and have that be like a free to use software so that any patient, when they're switching doctors, maybe traveling, has a complex condition, or just really wants to better understand their history or what's happening to them, that patients have the opportunity to do that. So we are going to help with that, and it is going to be just like a login for patients. That's our end goal, right? It shouldn't be this laborious thing where patients are calling up hospitals and doing everything. We're trying to design this for commercial uptake, right? We want our users to do this quick and easy. So we're working on getting it as easy as possible. It shouldn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes, ideally, to onboard a new user onto our platform. We think we can get it lower, like less than 5 minutes. So we want this to be as user friendly as possible, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that
that's
needs to
amazing.
happen in the background for that to happen, to allow us to create something like that in the first place.
That's amazing, and I very much appreciate that because as somebody so I'm the primary caregiver to my grandparents, whom I love very much. But in their old age, dealing with hospitals and their primary doctors going on to retirement and then having to transition their records, it's an actual pain in the ass. I don't have a fax machine at home. I don't know anybody who has a fax machine at home. So when I call the doctor's office and say I need these records, or call the hospital, I'm like, yeah, we're gonna fax it to you. I'm at a loss. I'm like, okay, how am I going to get this to myself, right? I think it's dumbfounding how much the medical industry, or at least the telemedical industry, is so behind, right? You think about it. I can go into I can go look at my tax returns from like 10 years ago by signing in through my bank account, right? As a third party process. How come I don't have the same capabilities with the medical industry? It's lagged behind so much. And I don't know what's caused this. I don't know if it's a law or if it's laws or it's just people have not been updating it. But it's very much appreciated to see participants leveraging this obvious or relatively easy data technology and internet technology to finally revolutionize and get us out of this archaic medical system that is not really helping anybody, and almost obfuscates the potential revenues and passive income that you might be able to get because you can't see that pharma is buying up this stuff. It's really unfortunate. And so just in the interest of time, Harry, I do want to move off of this and to one particular thing that you did bring up was the fact that part of the things or some of the limitations that may be present for yourself and other entities within the biomedical, the telebiomedical space is these laws. And I think the way that you put it highlights the fact that particularly in DeSci, not only do we need to contend with the financial infrastructure and the financial regulators, right? You mentioned that you will have to register with the SEC because a lot of what you're putting forth is essentially going to be considered a security. But we also all have to contend with the medical regulators. And so, can you give any insight into that, or some considerations that you guys are taking moving forward with that?
You know, I get this question a lot, and in terms of medical regulations, right? Obviously, there's the usual you can't give medical advice unless you're a provider. I mean, that's simple, right? And even the sort of vision that we're talking about running software diagnostics, those are actually have to be by definition FDA regulated devices, and we probably need to clear with the FDA before we put in that feature. Um, so I, it's one of those things, right, where we we see we see examples of radiology AI, for example, right? We saw that in 2010, where a computer could look at a radiology image and accurately diagnose a certain cancer or pneumonia at like 90 something percent, like 98, 99%, something insanely high. And I think a doctor could do it at like high 80s. So it was strictly better than a doctor. And we still haven't seen that into hospitals. Part of that you could say is the regulatory process, right? These algorithms actually have to get FDA cleared. Their software as medical devices is the technical term for them, SAMDs. They have to go through a regulatory process. They have to go through the FDA and they have to get cleared. But to be perfectly honest, the FDA is actually like pretty forward on these type of things. I think the United States has cleared more of these devices than any other country. And so like in terms of medical regulations, like there's the general safety administrations that are sort of put in place by the FDA, and there's also privacy regulations, like through HIPAA, for example. Unless you're creating a clear product, and we don't really have to go through the FDA. And HIPAA, there's like an AWS set specifically for medical technology, right? You have to pay like maybe 15% more versus regular AWS costs, but that's already set up to control for HIPAA. I actually think that's like mostly an excuse. I don't think there's a lot of regulations that you can't get around if you really want to help patients. Now, what I will say is the reason that healthcare doesn't move, a lot of people like to blame uh, regulation. In my opinion, at least from what I've seen at my day job and as I'm trying to create health exchanges, um, it comes down to incentives, right? The medical industry is very, very interesting because the person who gets the service does not pay for the service, and the person who pays for the service like pays to like maybe two or three third parties, right? So the way it works is when you go to the doctor, there's actually like four different companies in play, right? When you go to the doctor in America, your insurance is what pays that doctor, right? But that doctor has to log all that information through like a coding system created by the AMA for it to get reimbursed. Any drugs you take are created by a pharmaceutical company who probably has to sell to like a dozen different wholesalers before it gets to the pharmacy and your doctor prescribes it for you. And each pharma company has deals with all the pharmacies have deals with all the insurance companies have deals with all the providers, and you're just like one person in all this mess, right? There's so many conflicting interests, right? Insurance doesn't want to pay out, right? They want to keep as much of uh, their premiums in their pocket as they can. Doctors want to give good care. They want to give quality care, but they have to deal with insurance and pharma companies, right? Pharma companies want to sell their drug, right? But the buyer is insurance. And, when, for example, in the case of United Healthcare Group, when you have 100 million people under one insurance company, that insurance company has an insane amount of leverage, right? And so these are like just this is a little taste of what's going on in healthcare, but there's just so many different actors, and they're all incentivized so differently. Finding like a solution that wins for everyone is just really difficult, and that's why you see a lot of issues with not a lot of technology going forward, because um, if it's good for somebody, it's usually bad for somebody else, right? And so, but you need everyone to work together. So that's the issue.
And that, sir, is why I call you a key opinion leader in the space. I think it is tough for people to really who are not dealing with this on the day to day, let alone the participant, like the patients who just go and see the doctor and then walk out and have a bill, to understand how intricate the web is behind all of those transactions and all of those intermediaries. Um, as somebody who is aware of it and is building something like Health Exchange, how do you see yourself fitting in that matrix of interactions? Do you imagine being welcomed in? Do you think there will be some friction points within that? Are you going to be stepping on anybody's toes? How do you envision that?
I think we'll largely be ignored until we hit enough scale where someone notices and starts worrying about us, right? That's probably what's going to happen. Like, I don't think anyone's looking at us as a threat today, right? We're just like, I don't know, like a few thousand followers on Twitter, right? We don't even have a product out yet. Like, that's just, no one's paying attention to us, right? It gives us the freedom to really talk to our community and figure out how we want to go forward with this. Um, but the reason that we created Health Exchange was we think we could dodge this incentivization problem and just turn it into a two-party problem, bring other people on board later. And so the two parties that we're talking about here are consumers and pharma companies, right? We'll start there. Pharma has the dollars, consumers want to get paid, right? And so we think there's a match there. We can work with these pharma companies and we can get our users paid, and then once we get that flywheel going and more users start to join, then we can start thinking about getting into actual healthcare, putting on, like, I mean, they call them digital clinics, but that was that idea we talked about earlier, where if enough people join our platform and we have enough data, we can essentially train algorithms to detect diseases. And in that case, I mean, there's probably a good shot we have to work with the FDA, maybe get some like um, bridge program going. But at that point, we can essentially start like triaging care, maybe start working with the providers. I don't foresee, and I really want to stay away and be careful of working with insurance companies specifically. There's a lot of protections, but this is mostly for the consumer angle. There's actually a lot of protections legally that bar insurance companies from discriminating on the basis of genetics or any sort of health information. Um, and it went to the Supreme Court in the United States, I think like 20, 30 years ago, and that's sort of written into the law. But people just don't trust insurance companies. I don't trust insurance companies. So we're a bit more wary of working with that actor. But fortunately, uh, until we get to the point where like drugs are coming out, we actually don't have to deal with insurance companies. So the way we're getting around this incentive problem is by removing the actors. Instead of having to satisfy everybody, now for what Health Exchange does is we just have to get people to share data, compensate those people, and then uh, compensate those people with our crypto, and then increase the value of our crypto by making deals with pharma to do R&D, right? And that's essentially our mission.
We can definitely go into a whole spiel on, tokenomics. I think tokenomics in DeSci and refi and impact-driven projects is going to be fundamentally different from those that do not fall into that category. And I think it's going to bring up a whole new slew of metrics in terms of how to best craft your tokenomics. But we'll leave that to a future conversation. I just want to say that I very much appreciate, and you keep bringing this back, that Health Exchange is not just an incentivization platform to help with the donation of medical data, but internally to yourselves, your goal is also to really advance precision medicine through the application of other tech beyond that. So you're not just acting as like a data broker, but you actually want to leverage this to help the participants that are donating to the platform. And I think that's something really to note and to highlight in and of itself. It's very much appreciated from the holistic sense.
Yeah, and that's actually something we want to stay away from. And again, this is actually with our users in mind. We think being a data broker is actually like a lower value business. Like if you want to think like, and this is like purely from a business standpoint, the data itself is like the raw asset, right? Like it's kind of like the I don't know, like in mining, right? Like literal mining. It's just like raw ore. But then you need to refine that data, turn that into information and insight, and that insight is what creates real assets. That's where the real money is, right? That's where I mean, pharma isn't investing $4 to $10 billion on these deals if they're not expecting a return, right? And their return, I promise you, is at least like 5 to 10x. And so we want to go up that value chain, right, and capture more of that value for our users, because the more money we make at the end of the day is the more money our users make. And so what we're trying to do here is align like and Health Exchange, by the way, is not that. We're a private company. We want to stay a private company, and we want to reimagine the way sort of shareholders and users are treated by private companies. We think doing this as a nonprofit or a DAO will actually just not make as much money. By being a central entity, we can actually work with pharma companies and make these deals. And so it's almost weird. Like we don't plan to decentralize even. Like our whole idea is we use crypto and blockchain as the infrastructure required to create like a novel security that's good for consumers, right? Like we're not trying to be a like a decentralized protocol. Like and I totally understand like the relevance and the importance of that movement. Like I think like for example decentralized market makers like is an amazing idea. It makes a lot of sense. Like MakerDAO is a good example of like essentially it's like a lending platform, right? They have their rates. That makes a lot of sense to me. But the way we're using crypto and blockchain specifically is a way to keep track of what our community members contribute and then reward them accordingly. And I reckon a lot of what's going to happen in crypto over the next 5 to 10 years, there's definitely going to be like a section of crypto devoted to truly decentralized applications. Um, but on the other hand, I think you're going to get a lot of big companies come in and try to do something similar, like create rewards programs, try to create loyalty programs. I think Starbucks is already sort of on that path. I think we'll see some retailers come in and try to shake that up and sort of incorporate crypto into their business models. And it's not going to be decentralized, right? It's essentially going to be like a more liquid security or token. But it's going to be like you earn these points just by doing what you normally do with these retailers, right? Like the vision that I have for crypto and that our team has for crypto is, you know, you do the things you normally do, except you sign up on your phone for some like crypto rewards program and you earn passively, right? And so we think this passive data collection and sort of passive data generation it is going to be a really big use case for crypto. Um, I just personally I don't know if decentralization is the way to go, because when these data marketplaces are decentralized, they become commoditized, and when they become commoditized, there's a lower dollar value associated with it, and so the incentive to join one of these data marketplaces goes down. We need to keep the incentives high, right? Like people need to think they can make money before they join a platform. If you just commoditize your product, that's not going to happen. And so we actually think like by being a private company, we're going to generate more value to our users and our patients than not. Um, But that's just our sort of personal take on it. Plenty of people disagree. They're building their companies around the decentralized part. But looking at the space, and we're not the first people to try and do this patient data marketplace thing. Plenty of people have tried, and so that our take on it is, yeah, we need to become more of a services company and capture more of the stuff higher up the value chain.
Harry with the spicy takes to decentralize or not to decentralize. I wish you were in our conversation yesterday with Talent DAO and DeSci Denver, because we're having a whole panel discussion at ETH Denver on does your DeSci project need to be a DAO, and what level of decentralization does it have to be? And I'm of the opinion, I share your opinion, that I think the real answer to that question is it depends. And more often than not, full decentralization is not going to be what makes is not going to be really functional in at least DeSci. As it relates to DeFi and like financial rails and things that can be automated, MakerDAO was brought up as an example yesterday as well. When you just need automatic transfer, like transactions, that's easy to decentralize because you don't need an actual party there to facilitate that. You can just have a smart contract do that. But when it comes to intake and processing of medical data, deriving derivatives from these using scientific methodologies and scientific practice, you have more individual person real life inputs, and that inherently makes it less decentralized. And I agree very much to your point. To move these things, to move the needle significantly, I think decentralization isn't always the case. Now, can you have decentralization built on top of that? Wherein, for example, you have a DAO, somebody spins up a DAO of patient populations, which can then leverage their communal medical records on top of HealthXChange? Absolutely. And I think that would be the corner of decentralization that can be built on top of that. But the services, the railways, the actual fundamental products, I don't think the building of that, well, one, it's inefficient, but those don't need to be decentralized. And I think this is going to be the common conversation that is going to come up when we start to contrast DeSci and to a certain extent refi or resci really from the more traditional DeFi space. And again, Harry, shining your key opinion leader aspect characteristics in the space.
Still getting used to the key opinion leader thing, but I actually think this is actually a good sort of segue into I like ethics in DeSci. I think a lot of people associate decentralization with like trustlessness, and they associate that with like, I guess, uh, ethics by default, right? But I don't think that's always the case. Just because something's decentralized or centralized doesn't make it inherently like ethical, right? Like at the end of the day, it's the people running it, running these things that define, what can and can't happen. I do think, yeah.
And I would Well, I would argue in addition to that, I think the word decentralized has become a buzzword. And what people really mean is transparency.
Yeah, I agree.
And aspects like that, right? It's like the under decentralization, people will quote a variety of terms, right? Transparency, access, all these kind of things. And decentralized does not encompass all of that, right?
Hmm.
In medical field, when it comes to ethics, to a certain extent, really what you're looking for and what we're all looking for is transparency. Even in the financial industry, what you're looking for is transparency, where you can hold somebody accountable. You can develop or at least reinforce ethical behavior because you can see what's happening. And so that's where I think blockchain is important for medical and the scientific realm, is because I can see the raw data. I can see where it's moving. I can see who's paying whom for what. And then I can come after them with the receipts like, hey, you messed it up, or hey, you're playing dirty. I think that's really where the ethical consideration comes in with blockchain, or the impact of blockchain on ethics, not the decentralization part.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like transparency is what people are looking for, not necessarily like true decentralized operation. I mean, to your point about DAOs, right? Like backing a little bit, I don't think most DAOs like have the D and the A. Like it's decentralized autonomous organization, right? Most DAOs that I've looked at are just like they just got the O, right? Like they're not decentralized, they're not autonomous. People are still running it. It's usually a select few group of people, and it has to be that way in the beginning, right? Before you decentralize operations. Um, but yeah, to your point about transparency, yeah, the blockchain is, a good way. to technically determine if there's any issues going on, right? But I don't see why that has to be the case, especially in certain systems where that just doesn't make sense, right? Like uh, there needs to be a use case for putting something on the blockchain. In our case, it's payments, right? It's a payment infrastructure layer. That's what we're using the blockchain for. Like for others, they want to like, and by the way, we don't plan on putting any health data on the blockchain. Not only is that like a hard to do and kind of expensive, frankly, it's also illegal due to like GDPR and HIPAA considerations. You actually can't put any personal or private data on a non-dedicated machine. And so you actually can't upload health data onto the blockchain, or you can as a person, but as a company, you might get into some hot water with regulators, which is kind of a bummer. But the way we get around that and remain ethical is we have a business address, right, and we're incorporated in the United States. Like we plan to comply with all U.S. laws, and so if someone has a problem, like they could sue us, right? Like that. I think that's also like something that we want to preach. Like we're not just saying this, right? We're held accountable. Like we're registered in the United States. Anyone can look us up. Just HealthXChange, Inc. Right? Like that's our company. And so I think like I think a lot of what people are looking for is transparency, but a lot of what we actually need is like more accountability from people, right? Like you need recourse, or else people aren't going to behave in this space. That's just like my personal take on it, but I think that matters a lot more than things like decentralization for like future success.
Absolutely. The internet is a perfect example of that, right? If you can say whatever you want behind a handle that nobody knows is linked to you, right? That's why doxing is such a thing. It's that transparency that leads to accountability. So, in the interest of time, and I love conversations are oftentimes too short. There's so much that we can get into, but I do want to open it up. Eves has come up to ask a question. Anybody else who would like to ask a question, make a comment, speak to Harry relevant to HealthXChange, please do come in. So, Eves, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be trying to be quick. I'd love to extend the conversation as well because it's been extremely interesting. And obviously, yeah, thanks HealthXChange for spreading some wisdom, spitting some knowledge. So on the first point, on the thing about medical data being like really important and moving forward, doing things like tracking and preventative things, so you could sort of like detect that person might have a disease, or obviously we've seen with things like 23andMe, or what's the other one? I forget the other one now. There's another popular one where you spit in a tube. It's what? Sorry.
Ancestry.
It could have been Ancestry. I forget. Basically, do you know Dr. Rhonda Patrick? Have you heard of?
Yeah,
No.
I've heard of it.
Okay. She's like out there cutting edge kind of stuff. Really knows what she's talking about. She's frequent to Joe Rogan podcast. She has her own podcast. But anyway, the point is she has a tool. Essentially, if you can get your genetic data, which you can, obviously you can pay one of these services and then they give you the data. If you upload it into her tool, then she has a database essentially of markers. And then it will essentially tell you what diseases and things you're susceptible to. So maybe you'd be like diabetes or cancer, whatever it is. And then the other thing is it also gives you a custom diet. I'm not trying to shill this thing. I've actually never used it, but it just seemed like a really interesting idea that no one else was doing at the time, at least. You can essentially get a customized diet. So some people break down carbohydrates differently. Some people have different insulin response. Some people take better to fasting. There's all sorts of like these really minute things, and because the body's a bunch of complex interactions, and so because of that, she's trying to create a tool that kind of simplifies it for you and is about as objective as you can get. It's not someone saying, "Hey, I think you should drink green tea for a month," and that'll like heal your cancer, or that'll do this for you. It's based on like your actual biology, which is really cool. So anyway, the point is I've been advocating for sort of that kind of like using technology much better in our diagnosis of patients and things, because I think we definitely don't utilize it, as you were talking about, Jelani, with the the person trying to send some information over fax. That's ridiculous, quite frankly. But the example I'll give, I think, for things like, even things that are a little more subjective and harder to measure, so things like depression, I see the future, or a future I might like to see. Obviously, there are concerns with privacy here, but a future I might like to see is one where your kind of lifestyle is monitored. Because so this is anecdotal, but I've witnessed it happen to many people. You go to the doctor, you say you got this problem, you feel depressed, and not all doctors, obviously, but I don't want to generalize too much, but a lot of them, because of the pressure of the system and time being money, and all these kind of insurance companies, all these kind of things, and the culture as well, they kind of they prioritize in sometimes the antidepressants, SSRIs, and things like that. And my experience was that those were sort of offered to me without much of an analysis of the rest of my life. And that's not necessarily for the doctor. I'm not blaming the doctor necessarily. It's just a lack of information and lack of time, right? It's a resource problem. But if you had, your Apple Watch data, right? How much exercise do you do? How much are you moving? How much are you socializing, right? You could gather, you could infer those kinds of things from the data. Like, it doesn't need to track all your conversations and things, but you could, the geolocation, where are you at a club or a bar, or are you, is it a friend's house that you frequent that the software recognizes, this is your home and this is your friend's house. Point being, there's a bunch of things that you could sort of collect and have kind of like a lifestyle profile. And I always thought that would be like such a big help, because then the doctor doesn't have to sit there. Because realistically, to get like a good diagnosis, they should really be watching you for like a week. They should be watching. Okay, what kind of food are you taking in each day? What's your breakfast like? Oh, well, there's the problem. You're having way too much sugar. You're crashing during the day. You're actually not depressed. You just have too much sugar, or you drink too much coffee, those kind of things. Or actually, you've got diabetes, you have low blood sugar. That's why you feel low energy. There's so many different factors that could be tracked through lifestyle. And I did quickly, just second point, this one will be quicker. The decentralization thing, I just wanted to throw this out there, super random. I haven't thought about this a lot, but there is I guess like a field of sort of like political philosophy. If you guys have heard of a guy called Foucault, he has quite an interesting kind of like theory or hypothesis on this thing called biopolitics, and how like medicine or the medical industry can be used to kind of tyrannize people. And I thought that was quite, it's like a deconstructionist kind of philosophy, but it goes into medicine and politics, called biopolitics. And that's just a thought, just to add that into the like, does it need to be decentralized? Well, maybe there are a bunch of things that we don't realize could be tyrannical. And they might be in the future, something to look out for. And the quick example I'll give is, and as silly as it sounds, but it's something to think about. If let's just say the standard for nutrition, right, baseline nutrition changes, right, you're only able to afford certain level of nutrition from the store. If that changes, let's say your child needs, 50% more vitamin C, or X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, then you could be categorized under, if you're not providing that for your child, if the standards change and you're below those standards, you could be classified as like abusing your child, right? Like, malnourishing them. So I know that's like a bit of a wild example, but that's the kind of thing he's talking about. People don't think about these things. If the scientific or the medical standard was to change the baseline, and you fall under that, then does that become child abuse, right? Then are you sort of, set on by the state because the sort of like the medical standards have changed?
Yeah, I think so. I guess to your first point, yeah, I think there's a lot of room for personalization of care. A lot of what happens today is because doctors have like 15 minutes, right? In an 8-hour shift in the United States, average doctor sees anywhere between 20 to 30 patients. And that's a bell curve, right? So some people are seeing a lot more. When you break that down, right, like um, in an 8-hour shift, if you're seeing, let's say, like 2 to 3 patients, let's say two, right? Let's say someone sees 16 patients a day, that's 30 minutes per patient, minus lunch breaks, minus talking to colleagues, minus putting in all that data in the EHR, you're probably spending like 15 minutes with the patient. Yeah, you're right. Like that's not enough to really make a diagnosis, even if you're the best doctor on the planet. Everyone has bad days. The quality of doctors is also probably on a bell curve, right? So the care you receive at like a leading institution will not be the same as the care you receive at a community hospital. I think everyone's aware of that. And so trying to balance that and equalize that through data um, and through consumers is also like what we think can really sort of move the needle on that. And to your point, you can only personalize and customize and understand through data, right? Like if there's no information, you can't do that, right? Like someone's not going to sit with you for, like, to your point, for a week, but you can monitor through an Apple Watch, right? You can maybe connect your glucose monitor, and your doctor can look at your blood sugar levels over time. Then that's what doctors do for diabetics nowadays, right? There's like Dexcom and all these other continuous glucose monitors that are out there that do that sort of thing. Um, so I think yeah, that's definitely like a part of our mission, right? So the reason we're getting this data isn't just like for the sake of getting data, right? It's for the end goal of pushing medicine forward and getting people better care, whether that's in the form of the creation of better drugs or more customized and more personalized care delivery. To your second point about decentralization, so I think I agree with you, right? Like we need to be careful about how much power we give people, and there needs to be um, some structural safeguards against that. That being said, um, I think the crypto space is just as vulnerable to centralization as any other sort of area of business. And I would actually say like blockchain and crypto specifically is more vulnerable to centralization, um, because uh, I believe in like natural monopolies. I think a lot of the times when you completely decentralize something, you're just gonna get monopolies. That's the way things have shaken out in other business landscapes, right? Like if there's no regulation, like antitrust and things like that, generally speaking, if you have a decentralized system, like there's going to be winners that come out, and those winners are going to compound. And since it's a decentralized system with no authority, there's no one to break up like a large institution in crypto. That's actually one of the things I worry about DeSci specifically, right? So if you think about DeSci as a whole, there's a lot of things that people are trying to do with uh, allowing like improving upon the peer review process, decentralizing how scientific uh, sort of publication happens today. The way that was done in the past is, Nature. Everyone went to Nature, everyone went to JAMA. It was these like big laborious networks, but they built a brand. In DeSci, it's probably going to be the same thing, right? Like we say it's decentralized, we say it's open to everyone, but you're going to need some sort of filter to figure out like who actually knows what they're talking about. All right, and so that happens. Like, what's the next logical step of that? It's well, okay. So if you're someone who wants to enter the space and you know your stuff, you go to the place where people know their stuff. Suddenly, that becomes an institution, right? And so I'm not going to I'm not against anyone in the space. I'm gonna preface that specifically. But let's just take, for example, like the people who have raised the most money, right? Which happens to be like everyone in that molecule subgroup, right? Like the Vita DAOs of the world. Um, and I think they have a few other like projects incubated, right? And those are they've raised the most money. They also tend to come from the most traditional institutions. And so, like, you have to ask the questions like, how is this fundamentally different? Even if they say it's decentralized, it's done on crypto, it's done on blockchain, great. But like, how is this fundamentally different from the systems in place today? Like, are we not just creating the same thing, and in 20 years it's going to be the same thing? Like, maybe. But I do think it's worth the try, right? Like, it gives people a different avenue or a different pathway to try something. So if you're a scientist, you're not just beholden to like Nature and JAMA and like these top scientific articles to publish. You could go to a VitaDAO, or you could go to one of these other sort of DeSci projects out there. but it's unclear whether in 20 years these DeSci projects will just become another nature, right? Because they're working off the same base, underlying like first principle, which is we want to build a brand that we're people who can accurately sift through science. Um, and I don't know, it's more like just food for thought. You can't predict these things, right? But I just want to put that out there, I guess.
Man, this has been such a great conversation. I'm sincerely sad that we have to end this up because we are a little bit over time. I just want to close out with one statement, and then Harry, I'd like to hear your final thoughts to my final question. But to your last point, and I think to the very nicely put, everything that we're building still comes from the underlying aspect of humanity. Humans are tribal by definition, by design, whatever you want to claim our history is, we are tribal by nature, and we're going to move towards things that specifically address our needs. So if and we're guilty of that as well. DeSci world is specifically guilty. Our whole brand and commentary is that we want to be the aggregation hub for all the information. Thus, participants looking to learn more about great projects like HealthXChange or Eve's podcast that looks at all these things in crypto, we want them to come to us and leverage our network to do so, right? So there is going to be that. Now, I believe that we, as the core team, are looking at it in a way to be inclusive to as many participants in the space. We're project agnostic, we're niche agnostic, we want to help highlight everybody. But if I was to step away and the core team wants to step away, then what happens? Or when we create a DAO and by some machination, somebody comes in and is able to take over, that might change. I think nothing is new under the sun. I very much agree with you, Harry, that if you look 10, 20 years down the line, we're going to have these major DeSci brands or these major Web3 brands that everyone's just going to flock to. And it's not going to be necessarily out of malicious intent, but it's just the people have spoken and they prefer this platform. And that generates a monopoly, and power corrupts absolutely. So all that being said, yes, these are definitely things to consider. And Harry, we're going to have you back for another conversation. I'm going to invite you on DeSci Peaks to have these conversations. Um, the last question that I have for you is, how can the community help HealthXChange moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, right now, just really, it's just follow our Twitter and join our Discord. We're going to launch a product. The plan right now is, yeah, 4 to 5 months. We'll get something out there, and then people can try it, use it. Anyone can sign up. It's absolutely free to use. You get all your health data in one place. Could be useful for just to see sort of what's going on, like out of curiosity. And we also have some features planned out. Eve's alluded to some of it, which is maybe not medical recommendations on this is what you have to do or we recommend you do anything, but something more like, hey, like you have mutations here, or people with this profile tend to have X. That sort of thing. Like it won't be like recommendations, because then we get into the whole FDA thing. But yeah, be on the lookout for that platform in 4 to 5 months. Other than that, follow us on Twitter, comment, retweet, likes, like that always helps, goes a long way. We'll probably be doing like a round of funding in the near future as well. And hopefully the idea is once we get that free to use product out, we can begin some of the tokenomic development and really start partnering with like patient advocacy organizations and things of that nature. We've already talked to a few people in the Web3 and DeSci space that are involved with patient advocacy groups. There's actually a person in MedDAO who was in the audience earlier today, maybe like 30, 40 minutes ago, and she sits on the board of a patient advocacy group for a rare type of brain cancer, actually. And so, these people are definitely out there. We really want to talk to anyone who's an advocate for patients. Anyone in the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry, we'll talk to anyone. And we're really here to just sort of foster an environment where we can collaborate and create something of value for everyone. But yeah, for now, Twitter, Discord, and be on the lookout for a product in the next few months.
Fantastic. So everybody, please do follow them. You can learn more stuff, selfless shill. You can come to DeSci World and learn more about, get all the contact information for HealthXChange from there, but definitely do follow. Very insightful tweets coming out of them. I'd like to also tell everybody, follow Eves for Fiat Lux. if you're interested in more crypto, wider crypto news, both DeSci and the other traditional DeFi space, definitely check them out. He has a great podcast going on. Um, and so that's it, everybody. We're wrapping up. Thank you all for tuning in for this great discussion. Harry, again, thank you for coming here. Eves and everybody else listening, thank you for your commentaries and your considerations. Please make sure your DMs are open because, as usual, we'll be dropping POAPs for you. If you'd like to learn more about other projects that we've featured on DeSci Rising previously, you can go to the DeSci World YouTube channel. This will be up soon. We're starting a TikTok. There's going to be snippets, short form content. Don't worry, there's a lot of things coming with the DeSci from the DeSci World project. With that in mind, we are launching our DAO relatively soon, and our microbes NFT are going to play a major role in that ecosystem, in the rider ecosystem. So if you'd like to support our endeavors and everything that we're doing, go grab yourself a microbes NFT. And with that all being said, I hope you guys have a great weekend. For those of you who will be in ETH Denver, I'm looking forward to seeing you in a week and a half or so. And yeah, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week for next episode of DeSci Rising. Have a great weekend, guys.
Thanks, Jelani. Thanks, Eve. Have a good one.
Take it easy. Bye.